Judge William Carter sat high on the bench of the Oak Ridge County Courthouse, his sharp blue eyes scanning the courtroom below. At 63 years old, he had spent more than 3 decades presiding over cases, believing in the law, in justice, and in the system that upheld both. On this particular morning, the air was thick with tension. The case before him had been a harrowing one. State versus Jamal Richardson. A young black man, only 22 years old, was on trial for the armed robbery of a liquor store, during which the store owner had been shot and killed. The evidence against Jamal had seemed overwhelming. An eyewitness identified him as the shooter, and the prosecution had presented surveillance video that showed a masked figure of similar height and build committing the crime. Jamal, throughout the entire trial, had maintained his innocence. "Your Honor, I was at home with my mother that night," he had pleaded. "We were watching a movie. She can tell you. My little sister can tell you." But the jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict. And now, it was up to Judge Carter to determine the sentence. The law was clear. Because the crime resulted in a fatality, the mandatory minimum was 60 years in prison. It was, effectively, a life sentence for a young man who swore he had done nothing wrong. Judge Carter took a deep breath. This wasn't the first time he had handed down a severe sentence. In his mind, justice was about maintaining order, not emotion. "Jamal Richardson," he said, his voice echoing through the silent room. "This court finds you guilty of murder in the first degree. You are hereby sentenced to 60 years in state prison without the possibility of parole." A wail broke through the air. Jamal's mother collapsed onto the bench behind him, her sobs uncontrollable. Jamal himself just stared at the judge, his face blank with shock. The bailiffs moved in to escort him away. As they did, the young man turned to Judge Carter and said, "You just took my life away for something I didn't do." The words haunted the judge longer than he expected. But in the moment, he dismissed them. Justice had been served. A whisper in the darkness. Months passed. The case faded from the headlines, as they always did. But for some reason, Judge Carter couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It began with nightmares. He would see Jamal staring at him from behind the prison bars, his eyes filled with betrayal. Then came the whispers in his mind, a small but persistent voice asking, "What if you were wrong?" One evening, while reviewing old case files at his study, he came across a report buried in the paperwork. It was a forensic analysis of the fingerprints found at the crime scene. None of them belonged to Jamal Richardson. He frowned. That was strange. During the trial, the prosecution had focused on the eyewitness and the grainy surveillance footage, but he had never seen much discussion of forensic evidence. His curiosity deepened. He pulled up the testimony of the store owner's widow, who had sworn she saw the shooter flee in a red hoodie. But the night Jamal was arrested, he had been wearing a blue hoodie, a detail his public defender had barely argued in court. Something wasn't right. Had he just sentenced an innocent man to 60 years? The search for truth. Determined to uncover the truth, Judge Carter reached out to an old friend, Detective James Holloway, who had worked on the case. "James," the judge asked over the phone, "do you remember the Jamal Richardson case?" There was a long pause. Then Holloway sighed. "Yeah, what about it? Did we get it right?" There was another pause, but this time it felt heavier. "Judge, if you're asking me that now, maybe you already know the answer." Judge Carter's stomach dropped. "What do you mean? You ever hear about the Hollis Boys?" Judge Carter had. The Hollis Boys were a known gang in Oak Ridge, responsible for countless robberies. "There's been talk," Holloway admitted. "Some informants say a guy named Dre Hollis was bragging about how he let some kid take the fall for the liquor store job." Judge Carter's heart pounded. "Do you have proof?" "Not yet, but if we push, we might find it." The fight for justice. Judge Carter took the matter into his own hands. He contacted the Innocence Project, a legal organization specializing in wrongful convictions, and provided them with everything he had found. They took up Jamal's case, launching a full-scale investigation. Weeks later, a bombshell dropped. DNA evidence from the crime scene matched Andre Dre Hollis, a known criminal. It wasn't just that Jamal was innocent. It was that someone else had walked free while he rotted in a prison cell. The case was reopened, and in a dramatic turn of events, Judge Carter was forced to sit in court, not as a judge, but as a witness, as he admitted that a terrible mistake had been made. When the gavel finally fell, the ruling was clear. Jamal Richardson was exonerated. After spending over a year behind bars for a crime he did not commit, Jamal walked out of prison, a free man, a changed man. Judge Carter could never undo what had happened. He could never return those lost months to Jamal, could never take back the suffering he had caused. But he could change. In the years that followed, he became an outspoken advocate for criminal justice reform. He pushed for better legal representation for the accused, worked to eliminate biases in sentencing, and made it his mission to never again let the system fail another innocent person. At a public event years later, he met Jamal again. "I'm sorry," Judge Carter said, his voice heavy with guilt. Jamal looked at him for a long moment. Then, to the judge's surprise, he extended his hand. "I lost a year of my life," Jamal said. "But maybe, just maybe, because of what happened, you can stop this from happening to someone else." Judge Carter took his hand and shook it firmly. In that moment, he realized justice was not about punishment. It was about truth. And for the first time in his long career, he truly understood what it meant to serve the law. The end.